Disclaimer. This video is not an endorsement, defense, or co-opting of Gandhian political philosophy. It is an attempt to neutrally and seriously explain the philosophical foundations, the constitutional structure, the economic logic, and the internal criticisms of the Gandhian vision of the Indian state. Chapter 1 of this video will focus primarily on the philosophical theory and the moral foundations of Gandhian logic. If you have clicked on this video mainly to understand how a Gandhian state would function in practice, you may choose to skip chapter 1 and move directly to chapters 2, 3, and 4. Timestamps for all the chapters are provided in the description below so that you can navigate directly to the sections that you are interested in. With that being said, let's begin. Chapter 1. Swarajya. Swarajya in Gandhian philosophy does not merely signify political independence from Britain. It does not merely signify home rule or the transfer of power from a foreign ruler to India. To understand Swarajya purely as independence from the British is to fundamentally misunderstand Gandhi. Swarajya for Gandhi is first and foremost a moral and ethical condition, not a political arrangement. It refers to self-rule in the deepest possible sense, the capacity of the individual to govern himself. Swarajya, self-rule. Gandhi begins not with the state but with the human being. His political philosophy is grounded in the belief that no society can be truly free unless its individuals are capable of internal discipline. A society composed of morally unregulated individuals, no matter how good the political system may be, will always be rife with corruption and deceit. In a society like this, political freedom merely replaces one form of domination with another, and thus for Gandhi, political independence without self-rule is hollow. Swarajya therefore presupposes ethical autonomy. It assumes individuals who are capable of restraint, responsibility, and conscience. Law in the Gandhian worldview is not a foundation of order, but morality is. When behavior is regulated primarily through fear of punishment rather than moral conviction, a society becomes dependent on coercive institutions. This dependence, Gandhi argues, is itself a form of unfreedom. This moral understanding of Swarajya leads directly to Gandhi's conception of ahimsa. Ahimsa is often reduced to non-violence in the physical sense, but Gandhi's understanding is far broader and more radical. Violence is not limited to physical harm. Violence also will include coercion, intimidation, compulsion, and the threat of force embedded in institutions. Any system that compels obedience through fear rather than consent is, in Gandhi's terms, violent. From this perspective, the modern state itself becomes morally suspect by its very design. The state governs through law, which is backed by force. If a citizen disobeys the law, then the police can then compel violence. If resistance continues, then imprisonment will follow. Ultimately, the authority of the state will rest on the monopoly over organized coercion. The state therefore has ultimate monopoly over violence. And for Gandhi, this is not an accidental feature of the state. It is its defining characteristic. Consider this simple example. Suppose the state decides to build a railway line in the name of efficiency for public good, and it really is. The railway must pass through the farmland of a small farmer. The farmer will obviously refuse consent, and at this point the state does not attempt moral persuasion, it invokes law. If the farmer continues to resist, the police are sent, the land is taken by force, and the process may be legal, but it is not non-violent. It is still coercion, but it is simply institutionalized and it is spoken of in a legal language. For Gandhi, such violence does not disappear simply because it is procedural or lawful. Violence remains violence even when it is sanitized by legality. And this is exactly why Gandhi viewed the modern state, the modern government, as a soulless machine which is efficient, rational, but morally indifferent. This critique leads directly to Gandhi's method of political action, which is satyagraha. Satyagraha is not just passive resistance, it is a tactical tool. It is a moral method rooted in the belief that truth possesses its own force. Unlike violent resistance which seeks to overpower the opponent with force, Satyagraha seeks to transform the opponent. Unlike violent resistance which seeks to overpower the opponent, Satyagraha seeks to transform the opponent. In Satyagraha, the individual refuses to cooperate with injustice, but also refuses to harm the wrongdoer. The objective is not victory, but it is conversion. The Satyagrahi holds firm to truth, accepts suffering willingly, and exposes the moral bankruptcy of this unjust action. The pressure exerted is moral and it is not physical. This method reflects Gandhi's deeper conviction that lasting social change cannot be imposed externally. Coercion may alter behavior, but it does not alter conscience. Only voluntary acceptance of truth can do that. A society that is reformed through force remains morally unchanged beneath the surface. Taken together, Swarajya, Ahimsa, and Satyagraha forms a coherent worldview. Swarajya demands moral self-rule. Ahimsa rejects coercion as a means of governance. Satyagraha offers a non-coercive method of resistance and reform. This worldview leads Gandhi down towards a deeply anti-statist path. He does not merely criticize specific governments or policies, he questions the legitimacy of the government itself. In Gandhi's ideal society, individuals would be sufficiently morally developed that the state would become unnecessary. Order would arise from shared ethical norms and consciousness and morality rather than enforced laws. And this vision approaches what can be described as enlightened anarchism, not as chaos but as order without coercion. It is important to clarify that Gandhi does not want to advocate for disorder. He advocates a society that is so morally disciplined that coercive institutions like the state will lose their justification to exist. The state, even if it exists at all, exists only as a minimal coordinator, not as a sovereign authority. This is the foundation upon which the entire Gandhian political project rests. Without understanding Swarajya as self-rule, Ahimsa as a rejection of coercion, and Satyagraha as a moral confrontation, the Gandhian state appears naive or impractical. And it largely is. But more on that later. When understood properly, it reveals itself as a radical reimagining of politics itself. This chapter establishes that Gandhian philosophy is not merely about independence, nationalism, or protest. It's about the reconstruction of the entire political life from inside out. This moral foundation is what gives rise to the Gandhian polity, the Gandhian economy, and the profound criticisms that follow. Chapter 2. The Gandhian State, a confederation of village republics. Chapter 1 examined Gandhian philosophy at the level of moral and ethical foundations. This chapter moves away from that philosophical plane to the question of political structure. If Swaraj is understood as self-rule that is rooted in moral autonomy, the immediate problem that arises is how a society can be governed at all. The Gandhian response to this problem finds its most concrete expression in the Gandhian Constitution for Free India 1946 that was drafted by Sriman Narayan Agarwal and endorsed by Gandhi himself. This constitution does not abandon Gandhi's deep suspicion of the state. Instead, it represents an attempt to reconcile that suspicion with the practical necessity of governance. And the result is not a conventional nation-state as we know it, but a radically decentralized political order designed to minimize coercion and prevent the concentration of power at the top. How practical is this? You can be the judge. The central principle of Gandhian polity is that political authority must arise from the smallest social unit and then be delegated upwards rather than imposed from the top to downwards. In modern states like India, sovereignty flows from a central authority to subordinate administrative units. In the Gandhian polity, however, this logic is reversed. The village is the foundational unit of political life. It is not treated as an administrative subdivision that is created by the state. It is treated as a self-governing political entity within its own right. Each village constitutes a village republic responsible for management of its own affairs. Governance within each village is exercised through the elected village panchayat. Very importantly, this panchayat is a combination of the legislative, executive and judiciary functions within that village. Panchayat members are chosen directly by the residents of that village. They are not appointed by any higher authority. Their legitimacy derives from the proximity and accountability with the people of that village. They live among those that they govern and are directly responsible for the immediate social and material conditions of village life. The panchayat is entrusted with the administration of village affairs, the execution of decisions taken at the local level and the maintenance of civic order. It does not function as a legislative body in the modern sense. It does not produce abstract laws that are applicable across distant populations. Its authority is executive, legislative and judiciary, grounded in the local consensus and customs. But you see, villages do not exist in a vacuum. They are federated into talukas, and each taluka is governed by a taluka panchayat composed of the representatives of each village panchayat within that taluka. And this is the crucial feature of the Gandhian system. Representation at higher levels above the village level is completely indirect. Citizens do not directly elect taluka authorities. Those who already hold local responsibilities select them. The taluka panchayat does not govern villages from the above. It has a coordinative role. It manages matters that cannot be effectively handled by the individual villages acting alone and represents the taluka at the district level. Its authority is delegated, limited and derivative. Talukas are then further federated into districts. Each district is then further federated into a provincial council, and each provincial council is then further federated into a central council. This National Central Council is constituted by the representatives selected from each of the provincial councils. It does not function as a sovereign parliament in the modern sense that we know it today. Its role is primarily just simply coordinative. It handles matters of all India concerns, ensures coherence amongst provinces, and manages external relations alone. The Gandhian Constitution explicitly rejects a bicameral legislature too. There is no upper and lower house designed to check each other through institutional rivalry. Instead, it provides for a unicameral National Assembly consistent with its commitment to simplicity and its rejection of concentrated sovereignty. This choice reflects the belief that layered legislative authority increases the distance between the people and political power. Because the most distinctive feature of the entire Gandhian polity is the direction of authority. In the modern republic, citizens directly elect members of the national legislature. Authority is therefore concentrated at the center, from where it flows downward into the states, districts, and local bodies. In the Gandhian system, however, citizens elect representatives only at the village level. Authority then ascends step by step to the taluka, district, provincial, and then finally central bodies. This structure ensures that higher levels of governance remain dependent on lower ones for their legitimacy. The center simply cannot detach itself from the local realities because it is constitutionally constituted by them. Power is prevented from becoming distant, abstract, or autonomous. Citizenship in the Gandhian polity is defined less by formal legal status and more by active participation in governance. Political life, therefore, is not episodic, limited to periodic national elections like how we have today. It is a continuous and local process, with the primary site of citizenship being the village, where individuals directly engage with the governance through the panchayat. Legal and enforcement mechanisms do exist within the system, but they are not its organizing principle. Law functions as a residual framework rather than a foundation of political order. The Gandhian Constitution prioritizes self-governance and moral responsibility over centralized enforcement. Taken as a whole, the Gandhian polity is neither a fully stateless society as it is envisioned in the ideal state, nor is it a conventional sovereign modern state. It is a constitutionally organized, radically decentralized political order designed to minimize coercion, prevent the accumulation of power, and preserve the moral autonomy. It sacrifices speed, uniformity, and centralized control in favor of participation, proximity, and restraint. This structure reflects Gandhi's belief that political power, if left unchecked, will inevitably become a form of violence. This chapter has now described how a Gandhian India would be governed in practice according to the Gandhian Constitution. It reveals a political system that is being built from the village outward, in which authority flows upward from the people rather than downward from the state. This chapter is therefore a bridge between the Gandhian moral philosophy of Chapter 1 and the material organization of society, which is Chapter 3. Chapter 3. The Gandhian Economic Order. Material Life under Swaraj. The Gandhian Constitution does not treat the economy as an autonomous or technical domain that is to be governed by efficiency, growth, or productivity. It rejects the modern assumption that economics can be separated from ethics and politics. In the Gandhian worldview, economic organization is inseparable from moral responsibility and political power. How a society produces, owns, educates, and defends itself determines whether Swaraj is preserved or undermined. The core assumption of this Gandhian economic order is simple but radical. Economic concentration inevitably produces political domination. If Swaraj requires a decentralized political authority, then economic power must also be decentralized. A society cannot remain free if its material life is organized around large centers of production, capital, and administration and industrialization. And it is for this reason that the Gandhian Constitution places the village at the center of the economic life, just as it does in politics. Village-based production is not an aesthetic preference or a romantic return to the past. It is a structural necessity within the Gandhian logic. Each village is expected to organize the production of basic necessities locally using local labor, local skills, and locally appropriate techniques. Economic self-sufficiency at the village level reduces dependence on distant producers and prevents the emergence of abstract economic power. Production in this system is oriented towards use rather than accumulation. Surplus will definitely exist, but it is not the organizing principle of the economy. The Gandhian Constitution does not aim to maximize output or growth. It aims to stabilize social life and prevent the creation of a large dependent population that is disconnected from their means of livelihood. Inter-village exchange is obviously permitted, but it is deliberately secondary. Villages exchange surplus through federated arrangements rather than through competitive national markets driven by profit maximization. The Gandhian Constitution avoids creating a unified national market precisely because such markets reward scale, capital concentration, and displacement of labor. This economic structure leads directly to Gandhi's rejection of large-scale industrialization and urbanization. Industrialization in the Gandhian Constitution is not entirely prohibited, but it is definitely tightly constrained. Industry is permitted only where it does not displace village labor, concentrate ownership, or require mass migration into cities. Large industrial centers are viewed as politically dangerous because they require centralized capital, centralized management, and disciplined labor forces. These conditions reproduce hierarchy, coercion, and dependency according to Gandhi. Urbanization is therefore treated with deep suspicion. Large cities are not regarded as engines of progress, but as sites of social alienation, economic dependency, and political centralization. Urban growth requires long supply chains, bureaucratic regulation, policing, and surveillance, all of which expand state power and erode moral autonomy. The Gandhian Constitution does not deny material needs. It denies that the scale is neutral. Property relations under this system reflect the same logic of restraint and ahimsa. The Gandhian Constitution explicitly abolishes zamindari and large-scale landlordism. Rent extraction without labor is treated as a social injustice, and at the same time, the Constitution rejects nationalization. Productive assets are not transferred to the state because state ownership merely replaces private domination with bureaucratic domination. Land is therefore treated neither as an absolute private property nor as a state property. It is treated as a social resource. Farmers are granted secure rights to cultivate land through lease and use rights, not through unconditional ownership. Control over land is tied to actual use and responsibility. Land cannot be held for speculation, absentee ownership, or accumulation detached from labor. This entire framework of owning land and social surplus is governed by this principle called as trusteeship. Now, trusteeship is not a moral optional virtue in the Gandhian system. It is the organizing ethic of economic life. Those who possess wealth or productive resources are understood as holding them in trust for society. Ownership is conditional upon social purpose. The right to use property exists, the right to hoard without limit does not. The Gandhian Constitution does not primarily rely on confiscation or redistribution to enforce trusteeship. Instead, it structures the economy so that excessive accumulation becomes difficult. Decentralized production, local markets, restrained industry, and limited finance together prevent the emergence of large concentrations of wealth. Finance and taxations also will follow the same logic. Fiscal authority begins at the village level. Villages raise revenue to meet local needs, and higher federated bodies draw resources only for the purposes that cannot be met locally. The Gandhian Constitution avoids creating a powerful central treasury because centralized finance inevitably translates into centralized control. Public expenditure is therefore restrained by design rather than by austerity. A state that does not produce rapid industrialization, urban expansion, and military dominance does not require extensive fiscal extraction. Education occupies a central place in this economic order because it shapes the kind of society that can sustain it. The Gandhian Constitution adopts the principle of basic education integrated with productive labor, commonly known as Nai Talim. Education is not designed to separate knowledge from work or to produce a class of professionals detached from village life. Learning is combined with productive activity so that education reinforces self-reliance, dignity of labor, and social responsibility. This educational model resists the creation of an elite dependent on urban employment and bureaucratic expansion. It is a rejection of the industrial education system and credentialism and is therefore inherently anti-intellectual. But it is also anti-alienation. Knowledge is meant to serve community life, not detach individuals from it. And then we have the very infamous defense policy. Because defense policy finally reflects the same logic of restraint that governs the economy. The Gandhian Constitution recognizes the need for defense but also rejects the militarization as a principle of national organization. Large standing armies, military economies, and permanent war readiness are treated as incompatible with ahimsa and swarajya. Defense therefore is minimal, oriented toward protection rather than power projection. The assumption is that a decentralized, self-sufficient society with limited external ambition reduces both the likelihood and the scale of conflict. But that is simply not true, because when your neighbors want conflict, you have to be ready. But according to Gandhi, military organization like industry is constrained because it requires centralized command, centralized resources, and mass mobilization of all people, all of which expand coercive authority of the central state. Taken together, the Gandhian economic order constitutes a deliberate refusal of the modern political economy. It does not ask how to maximize growth, output, or power as it should for an efficient nation state, but it simply asks how to organize material life without reproducing domination from the central state itself. This is not an accidental outcome of moral idealism. It is the logical extension of a philosophy that treats the concentration of wealth, labor, capital, or force as the primary threat to freedom. The Gandhian Constitution therefore sacrifices speed, scale, and accumulation in the favor of stability, self-reliance, and moral autonomy. It values stability over progress. Whether such an order is feasible is a separate question. What matters here is the internal logic. Chapter 4. Criticisms. The preceding chapters explain Gandhian philosophy, its constitutional expression, and its economic order on their own terms. These are Gandhi's own words, not mine. However, this final chapter subjects that vision to a systematic criticism. These criticisms do not come from modern commentators looking back in retrospect. They come from Gandhi's own contemporaries, thinkers who confronted the same historical conditions and arrived at fundamentally different conclusions. At the heart of all these disagreements lies a single fault line: the role of the state in shaping society. Gandhi viewed the modern state primarily as an institutionalization of violence, organized, legitimized violence, and rendered permanent through law. At the heart of all of these disagreements lies a single fault line: the role of the state in shaping society. While Gandhi viewed the modern state primarily as an institutionalization of violence, which is organized, legitimized, and rendered permanent through law, because of course coercion corrupts moral life, he rejected the idea that social transformation could be engineered from top-down approach. His political vision was therefore deeply anti-statist. The Gandhian Constitution itself represents a compromise with the reality, an attempt to preserve this anti-statist instinct while conceding the practical necessity of a modern state by fragmenting the authority and dissolving that very same power that he hated into layers of local self-governance. Most of Gandhi's major critics rejected from this starting point alone. They did not see the state primarily as a moral danger. They saw it as a necessary instrument for justice, for survival, and for modernization. Their disagreements with Gandhi differ in emphasis and direction, but they converge on the same conclusion: that the Gandhian state asks more of a society than a society can actually realistically deliver. Let's start with Ambedkar's critique. B.R. Ambedkar's critique of Gandhian philosophy begins with a different diagnosis of Indian society. According to Ambedkar, there was more to be feared from the cruelty of society rather than the state itself. Because Ambedkar considered caste hierarchy and inherited inequality to be essential to Hinduism, Ambedkar argued that moral self-rule was not a neutral condition. It was a privilege enjoyed by those who already had protected social power. Ambedkar's central objection to the Gandhian state is that local self-governance does not occur in social vacuum. Villages are not morally homogeneous communities. They are sites where caste power is the most entrenched, and this is 100% true. Even today, the places where casteism exists the most is rural places of our country, not in urban centers. So according to him, panchayats in this context would be inevitably dominated by locally powerful castes. Decentralization would not dissolve oppression, it would simply relocate it. And this is why Ambedkar famously described the Indian villages as sites of social tyranny rather than democratic republics. His argument was structural and not rhetorical. According to Ambedkar, the closer that the power is to society, the more it reflects society as it actually exists, including its injustices. Without a strong central authority capable of enforcing rights and overriding oppressive customs, decentralization risks abandoning the vulnerable to the mercy of local majorities. For Ambedkar, justice could not be entrusted to conscience alone. It required law, enforcement, and constitutional authority. The state, in his view, is not the enemy of freedom, but rather its guarantor. Rights that are not backed by enforceable power are merely moral appeals. Ambedkar extended this critique into the economic sphere too. Gandhi's preference for village-centered production and occupational stability, Ambedkar argued, risked freezing caste divisions in place. By tying individuals to the village life and traditional occupation, the Gandhian system preserved the social conditions that sustained the caste hierarchy. Industrialization, by contrast, offered mobility. Factories, cities, and large workplaces brought together individuals from different regions and backgrounds. They forced interaction, weakened ritual segregation, and enabled the emergence of a class-based solidarity. Ambedkar therefore favored industrial modernity not because it was morally superior, but because it disrupted caste society in ways village life could not. In Ambedkar's assessment, the Gandhian state failed not because it lacked ethical intent, but because it underestimated the depth of social domination. Where Gandhi trusted moral reform, Ambedkar demanded institutional power. V.D. Savarkar. V.D. Savarkar's critique of Gandhian philosophy operates on an entirely different axis, however. His concern is not internal social justice, but external survival of the Hindu nation. Savarkar approached politics as a question of power, history, and conflict. For him, the central question was not how to purify politics, but how to preserve sovereignty in this hostile world. Apart from Savarkar's disagreement with Gandhi on the question of minorities, Savarkar also rejected Gandhi's suspicion of the state as a strategically dangerous organization. He did not deny the moral appeal of non-violence, but he denied its sufficiency. In a world that has been organized around military power, nations that refuse to organize violence do not transcend it, they become dependent on the restraint of others. After all, morality works only when all the players are being moral. From this perspective, Gandhian minimal defense appeared reckless. A decentralized polity with a weak central authority and limited military capacity would remain permanently vulnerable. Moral restraint could not substitute for preparedness. Savarkar therefore regarded militarization as a necessity and not a moral failure of the state. This strategic realism extended into his views on modernization and industrialization. Where Gandhi feared that industry would corrupt moral life and concentrate power, Savarkar saw industrial capacity as inseparable from national strength. Industry produced not only goods but infrastructure, logistics, and technological competence, all of which translated directly into military and political power. Savarkar's disagreement with Gandhi also rested on a different conception of national allegiance. Gandhi's political imagination was rooted in local communities and moral universalism, where Savarkar believed that modern politics required a centralized national consciousness capable of overriding regional, sectarian, and local loyalties. Allegiance, in his view, must be owed to the nation as a whole. Any person who considers India as his Pitrabhumi and his Punyabhumi is therefore a Hindu who is a citizen of this Hindu nation. According to Savarkar, a polity organized primarily around village autonomy risked fragmentation. Without a strong center capable of mobilizing resources and commanding loyalty, the nation would lack strategic coherence. And for Savarkar, power had to precede ethics. A nation must first survive before it can moralize. Where Gandhi feared the violence of the state, Savarkar feared the violence that emerges when the state is weak. And finally, Nehru. Jawaharlal Nehru's critique of Gandhian philosophy is civilizational and historical rather than a moral or strategic philosophy. Nehru did not believe that a civilization could opt out of modernity without condemning itself to irrelevance. The task, as he saw it, was not to reject modernity but to master modernity. At the core of Nehru's disagreement with Gandhi lies a commitment to science and rationalism. Nehru regarded scientific temper as essential for dismantling superstition, hierarchy, and economic backwardness. Gandhi's reliance on spiritual transformation and moral restraint appeared inadequate for governing a complex plural society facing mass poverty. Nehru was obviously skeptical of Gandhi's moralization of politics because for him, politics was not an arena for ethical self purification. It was an arena for solving material problems at a scale. Poverty, disease, illiteracy, and technological stagnation required coordinated planning, technical expertise, and centralized mobilization of resources. Now, however successful Nehru was, that's another discussion. But the difference becomes clear in their opposing economic visions. Gandhi favored a decentralized village production and limited industry, while Nehru believed that such a model would not sustain a population of India's size. Without heavy industry, large infrastructure projects, and state-led planning, India would remain dependent and underdeveloped. Therefore, for Nehru, planning was not inherently authoritarian. It was a rational response to scarcity and scale. Dams, steel plants, universities, research institutions were not symbols of domination of state power. They were actually instruments of emancipation. The Gandhian rejection of industrial modernity therefore appeared to be Nehru not to be morally superior but to be historically anachronistic. Nehru also rejected Gandhi's suspicion of urbanization. Cities, in his view, were centers of innovation, scientific exchange, and cultural synthesis. Urban life also weakened traditional hierarchies and expanded intellectual horizons. A civilization that deliberately limited urban growth limited its own future. Underlying all these disagreements was a different conception of progress. Gandhi measured progress in moral terms: restraint, simplicity, self-rule, moral growth. But Nehru measured progress in historical terms, such as scientific advancement, material well-being, and institutional capacity. Alright, that brings us to the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you found this video useful, please don't forget to hit the like, share, and subscribe button. It genuinely helps the channel grow and reach more people who are really interested in serious political and philosophical discussions like this. The broader goal of this channel is not to judge and make moral comments retrospectively, but it is to understand the different political ideas and civilizational paths that were available to India apart from the one that we ultimately chose. If that kind of content interests you, or if this video helped you think more clearly about Gandhian philosophy, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. You can also follow me on my socials. I'm on Instagram at civitas.samir. I'm also on Twitter, that is at civitassamir. Feel free to reach out to me there as well. Thank you again for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.